There's no cognito hazard, Doctor. We walked into the light. It was always that way. I saw myself walking into the light, and I followed, and was followed. We became so very small, so very close, so very safe. We are the dust floating in safety, me, and me, and me, and all the me's that have come and will come. We will always walk to light, and the light will always be my destination. It is safe here. You know, a wise man once said, "The safer you are, the more safe you become." Some deep thoughts. So I'm making a character in a D&D Ravnica campaign, and he's going to be a guy that he comes up with these, like, things that sound kind of deep, but actually don't really make any sense at all. I think I'm going to, like, work that into a, sort of a character flaw of sorts with him. He's like, a grimdark dude, so I think that'll be fun. Hi there, welcome to SCP Cafe. We are recapping 2 weeks today. Week 49 and week 50. Week 49 was a little short on content. We only had 6 articles in scope. Week 50, on the other hand, had quite a few. So we're going to talk about a total of 12 skips today. All in, we're not going to do a full recap treatment on each of them. But I am going to, I picked out a bunch of ones that I thought were interesting, things that I liked about each of them, and I'm going to go into those. Before we get there, though, the question on everybody's mind, where the hell is the 5,000 contest? And I don't have an answer for you. I really thought it was going to happen this week, and it didn't. So I am as in the dark as anybody. When I have news, I will let you know. It may happen, God, it could happen at any time, literally any time. So we'll see. I really wish I could break some news for you, but I got nothing. I have gone ahead with the plan that I indicated and paused the Patreon for January. My thought process right now is, as the year winds down and we hit January, like, first week, I will be doing the award show, and I'm not really committing to anything beyond that. Things are kind of looking up as far as the possibility of future shows, as well as my mental state. I appreciate all of you that did send me little messages of encouragement. I think not having any real direction on those 2 weeks off was actually really detrimental. It turns out I'm not able to really, like, self-motivate without at least, like, setting a plan, and it was not something I really expected. I thought I'd be able to, okay, we're going to do stuff today, and it's too easy to say, well, I wasn't really feeling that. That's okay. There's always tomorrow. It's a long break, and the long break gets short fast, and then you realize you have things you actually must do to prepare for, a new job, which the new job has been awesome. I'm absolutely in love with this place, and the first week went about as well as I could possibly imagine. So they're actually adjusting my schedule to more or less what I had, if not a little bit better, at my previous job. So that means I do get out early. I can typically be home by 4 o'clock, and with that, I can still have time to do reading, look at recording, over the course of the week. But right now I am, like, 100% committed to, like, doing my best at this place because it's awesome. I don't want to mess with a good thing. So I'm still going to be taking some time off, just to get acclimated with that place and, evaluate how much I can do for the show, and all of the other aspects of this in a little while. So that's my plan right now. It's not as bleak as it was a couple of weeks ago, where I was really struggling. I'm doing a lot better right now. What else have we got? not a ton. I am going to be releasing some info on the Scuttle project. I still have some decisions to make on how I'm going to, sort of request funding, whether I'm going to use Patreon or a more focused platform like Open Collective that will sort of lay out exactly how money gets spent on the project. Because really I'm just looking for a way to cover costs. This is going to be sort of a way to model what our own SCP Wiki might look like on our own infrastructure. So getting that sort of laid out, I think, would be really beneficial. But is it really worth it? Because Open Collective is like a little bit more expensive too. So I don't know. I'm still making some decisions, reading pros and cons and trying to get feedback from others on what they've done and how they like the decision they've made. So, but the good news is the Scuttle Wiki backup project is going really, really well. I have extended it to back up several of the foreign wikis that will expand to include all of the official wikis of SCP International before the end of the year. Currently, the Spanish, French, German, and Russian wikis are all backed up and being backed up continuously, as well as the Wanderer's Library. So I have quite a few still to go, but I have a good workflow now on how to add new wikis to the backup scope, and I still have some refinements to make that go faster and knock a little bit of the cost off of because it does all kind of get paid for out of Patreon funds right now. That was sort of the first couple of tiers, was having it all get covered out of that bucket, but I haven't really actually transferred those funds because it's all to do things under the LLC that SCP Cafe runs under. You gotta divide stuff out, and it sounds a lot like work, and I've just been like willing to pay for that out of pocket to not deal with it. So the funds are there, and they're gonna get used as we ramp this up, because it's outgrowing the server already, and I need to give it a little more muscle, and especially as we're back, theoretically we're going to be backing up like almost 24 wikis by the end of this. So I will relay news to that as I sort of make the final decisions on the future of that platform and how it's going to get funded. All right, I think that's all the boring stuff. I'm going to talk about SCPs. I want to start with SCP-4026, titled Guardian Angel by Uncle Nicolini, that starts out with this object class of neutralized and procedures that says no containment procedures are necessary at this time. I like how immediately we kind of know we're going to deal with something that is already done and over with. This had a nice combination of things going for it, of taking the expectation of somebody that appears, manifests when somebody is considering suicide, and you're like, oh, okay, they're going to talk him out of it, because it explains how generally the survivors of these events, they don't remember interacting with this thing that shows up, but they remember being dissuaded from suicide via like an overabundance of negative emotion and disgust at their actions. So you think, okay, Guardian Angel, they're like talking him out of it, blah, blah, blah. So you get into this interview log, and it turns out that this -1 that manifests is basically like, nah, jump, go for it. It's a fun show. And they're disgusted, and they tell him, fuck you, I'm not going to jump, just like out of spite instead. So I wasn't expecting that when it was, why are you gonna, why are you doing it? Well, it's quite a lovely show. Are you trying to get me to jump? Like, yes, it's why I'm here. I was not expecting that, and I think that was a commonly expressed thing in the comments. And then, there was a fight. -1 presumably gets tossed off this cliff, and that's it. And that's how we end up with this thing being neutralized. So there's that, which is fun, but there's also the consideration, the fridge horror thing that comes later. It's like, wait a minute. If they had this big fight, but this thing was 93% successful in keeping people from killing themselves, even though this guy, this -1 may have been kind of a twisted bastard, he was ultimately helping people, and now he's gone. So those two things together, I think, really resonated with people, and this is actually, I believe, the highest skip out of the last 2 weeks, currently at plus 126, including my plus one. I've also got here SCP-4901 titled Remember Rudy Benson by Stormbreath, and this is sort of where like a convergence of Chicago Spirit and Parawatch, which I like from a thematic standpoint because Chicago Spirit, operating in such a dense area in the time they were active, it would make sense that there's plenty of urban legends out there about them. And this is a slightly more informed Parawatch than I've seen elsewhere. And there were actually two of those like that this week, which is interesting. And, I don't know, I don't really know how I feel about that yet. I don't necessarily, I like them to be sort of they're closer to the truth than they know, but it's a little past that with both of these. But that's a personal, flavor sort of preference. The piece itself is really good. I think anytime we get to, have these interviews with Dick Chappell, where he gets to really, show off and flesh out that character, I'm always a fan of that. I think he's a great character, and the story with Rudy Benson himself is pretty gnarly. There's some really cool horror going on in here, and there's enough left unsaid that you do feel good as a reader when you can sort of connect the dots and understand what's actually going on. I really did enjoy this. Not the highest rated of the bunch this week, but might actually be my favorite. Now, I will note I was not alone in my criticism of Parawatch being a little too knowledgeable in this context. Couple of folks had the same thing as their main point of contention with this article, and Stormbreath, for their part, basically said that this is sort of born out of how big Chicago Spirit was. So that's a reasonable sort of thing. If it's a reasonable counterpoint. If the Chicago Spirit was a huge operation, then Parawatch could be pretty thoroughly informed just through, conspiracy theorists get into all sorts of shit, and they're good at collecting and retaining things and making connections down the road, whether or not they're actually accurate. And I think that's still my problem, is it's not how they know so much. It's not like that this was really lengthy, it's that it was all accurate as far as it went. So I think you can address both sides of it, that yes, things were really well known, but you could have Parawatch sort of come to an incorrect conclusion, or, try and link something that wasn't necessarily connected, that would make it feel more like, a conspiracy theory message board and less of what feels like sort of an exposition vehicle in this piece. Moving on here, SCP-4469, titled Memory Shovel by Mac Warren. And this one was also one of these that sort of, I had expectations, and some of them happened and some of them were totally subverted. You have this shovel that will sort of anomalously be able to dig up things related to a name written on the surface of the shovel that was forgotten for some length of time. Now, you've got one doctor that is digging up things that belong to his daughter who died in a house fire, and they show up in the logs several times as they're getting sort of, chastised about this, like that they really need to stop. And of course, there's an incident, a capital I incident, where they actually dig up a person. They managed to actually exhume a human female who is alive, claims to be 14 years old despite appearing to be much older, basically, being a young female, maybe in their mid to late 20s. So we have this interview where all of the answers they all make sense. They all sound like it could actually be this doctor's daughter. And genetic testing also shows it is likely her. And what do? We have sort of our climax here is that she asks, "Where's my mom and dad?" And there's a pause, and the interviewing doctor says they're aware of your condition, but I'm afraid that we cannot grant them access to you at this time. We have to conduct tests first before they're permitted. And she says, "I understand, thank you." And we have our little thing at the end of the log. The subject was later given amnestic treatment targeted toward the memories of her parents to prevent Dache's growing concerns of their well-being for her. Of note is that Dr. Collins is divorced from his late ex-wife following the death of their child in the house fire. And so this is sort of, when we talk about cold, not cruel, this is difficult, right? Like, this is right on the borderline. It feels a little like a little too much, but it gives you something to really think over. And I will say the very end, this little update, this little 2-sentence Dache's begin to increase in intellect and intelligence. Subject's mental age is theorized to reach her normal age by late September of 2033. I don't think that really buys us anything. It wasn't something that it was sufficiently expounded upon to make it the final thing that the reader is left with. So I think that can probably go altogether. And instead, using that last little bit of, yes, the doctor ended up presumably digging up something akin to his dead daughter, but will not be given access to her. That's pretty powerful stuff, and I think there would actually still be room there to continue developing the story if you so chose, or you can do what this did and sort of leave it there. Either one has advantages. I think the real advantage to doing it the way this was done is that it does just sort of punch the reader in the gut, that they they're sort of left with this, oh my god, so that's what's going to happen. And that's very much probably what the Dr. Collins is dealing with as well. So you do get that empathic sort of gut punch right at the end, and I think that's how I would love to see this thing actually wrap up, rather than this little update at the end. But that's a fairly minor complaint on a short piece where the payoff, I think, really out surpassed the build up to it. So really well done. This was a +1 for me as well. Moving on now, SCP-4654, titled Angels by Dado. This is by DJ Cactus. This piece has a lot going on graphically in the early section. We've got some boilerplate stuff about the classification and the ACS block, and then a wide image, and then below that the news, like the little thing on what site, director, research head, task force, blah blah blah. It's a lot of stuff, and it is only barely passing my test of, I need to be able to at least see some part of the article on the 1080p display before scrolling. I can see 5 words, the entire known supply of SCP-4654. I guess that's 6 words. I can count. I swear to God I can. So, it is something that I've discussed in the past, that the more you add to the beginning, fair or not, I consider the expectations ramp up sort of in an equal fashion to the amount of stuff you're bombarding me with at the beginning of the piece. The other thing that doesn't really land with me is the opening image here. It's sort of a wide image. The caption says it's blackened skin of an individual suffering from 4654 withdrawal symptoms, but this is so close up that it doesn't strike me as something that is scary because it doesn't look like skin. It's black little chunks of things with some striations in it that might be skin, but for me it looks like it might be like a burning log or something else. So like if you wanted to compare it to say SCP-106 and the image of the victim where it adds a lot of punch, this comparatively is so abstract that it really doesn't provide any. So beyond that, the skip itself describes sort of a drug that is it's short in duration, and if people are underdosed, it's like, I guess it's like you basically, once you take it, you sort of have to take it regularly, and it's sort of a fine line because if you don't have enough and you go into withdrawal, the symptoms are really bad, and if you take too much, the symptoms are also really bad. And they're bad in different ways though. Basically, too much and you become an angel, too little and you become this charred, blackened thing that is sort of a canine appearance. So that neither one's good. We have our communication to and from Dado, who wants to destroy. They want us to destroy this, that it was a mistake. It's not good for people. Dado is sorry. Please destroy box. And, our sides are, how did you get this number? And, Dado is just very, please destroy it. We did a very bad thing. We'll give you anything you want. If you want money, I'll give you money. If you want more medicine, I'll give you that. The medicine in the box is bad. I did bad. Please destroy. Please, please, please. And, we're not responding. And it turns out that was a poor idea on our part that, it's not in our nature to destroy it. So that was in itself a reasonable justification for why it didn't happen. But at the same time, it feels like a misstep that we didn't follow up on this more in this context. Like, we have the idea that this was sort of a text on their personal cell phone, which stretches my credulity a little bit that that's a thing that could even function in a Foundation site. But I'll let that go. But more that we didn't fully follow up on this. This, and it's something I want to explore because I think it's sort of pivotal to the piece and what happens afterwards. In the past, we've had Dado try to communicate with people in ways that don't make a lot of sense to us, but by its own sort of bizarre logic, it was the sensible thing for them. And we don't really elaborate on whether this agent that received the text was actually involved in this project. I think, we could sort of get around us not doing anything about the text by this going to somebody completely unrelated with the project. And, we didn't make the connection later. Maybe the Foundation is so compartmentalized that nobody at the location that this, text landed in actually knew about Dado, and it just sort of looked like a joke text or, a junk text or something. So we, but that's not really what we chose to do. This is actually targeted to the site. And Dado knew enough to, target things specifically to the area and the site. And, I do like that we go from this exchange to addendum that just strictly, it simply is titled Loss of Area 4, which is a nice little jump cut into, something bad happened and you're hooked in that way. Our distress call that is set up at the end of this has a lot of description of things and very little actual dialogue. And we talk about the quiet sound of wet meat being dragged. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time in the Foley room, but that is not something I'm like immediately hearing in my mind's ear, if you will. Um, it in a textual format, obviously that's a good way to like convey a really grisly, exposition of what's happened at Area 4. And so there's that, but it's like, if you want to say less, try and maybe say less, because we've got, wet meat being dragged. How are we inferring that is what's happening? What exactly is that sound? How do we know it's meat? Blah 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 blah. So that said, we've got other little things in here that do better. The rustling of feathers, light organic cracking sounds, soft moans and gasps from vaguely human voices are audible, but no individual source. And this is going on for 17 uninterrupted minutes. And after a while, there's only a single person's shallow breathing, and then they speak, "I see heaven," and the call ends. And I like this as an ending. It maybe, the things that I don't like or want to see improved about the piece, it basically has to do with sort of the pacing and the resolution of this, because we really have none, right? Like we get right to the peak here and then we end it. So the ending was already very heavily implied by the description of sort of the pharmacological effects of this this drug. So it feels like it falls a little flat at the end, because we just have this, sort of abrupt end to the thing and nothing further to sort of reveal to the reader. And I think it just could use that last little bit to push it from good to great. It's worth a +1 as it is, but I'm saying that feeling that there's more that could be done with the piece. It could go from good to great with just that little bit extra. Moving on, SCP-4197, titled Hollow by Dyslexian. I really did enjoy this piece quite a lot. It is sort of in the vein of the he thinks he's people sort of trope, where this time we have a young Sarkic who is basically doing their flesh crafting for good, and in really underserved areas, fixing brain tumors from a little boy in Botswana, and they were found dispensing mosquito netting and anti-malarial drugs. It's finding taking the formula, what you're used to seeing out of a known entity, and sort of flipping the script, giving them making them a real character and something to be empathized with. And this sort of gets to what I think the heart of modern SCP writing really goes for, which is giving you the opportunity to empathize with both sides. And in many cases, you're empathizing stronger with the SCP entity itself than the Foundation. And I think when you do that, you can really get into a lot of what people are actually writing for the wiki for, things that they're actively trying to convey. So this, I think, does that in an interesting way, in discussing basically that they're not interested in fighting their parents' wars. This is also something that I think is highly relevant and contemporary. It is really, really well executed. Some things that I like about this: our test logs have a lot of really interesting detail. Talking about rituals, that there's enough detail that you can sort of visualize what's going on, but also still has that fantastical element. And we intermix that nicely with the test logs and the interviews where we can hear from them how they feel about things and the understanding early on that they're not going to ever be let out. And also seeing sort of how they are dealing with, reconciling that with their own personal motivations. And a thing that I really, really liked with the third interview is an entirely different sort of feeling. And we reveal one Jonas Salk worked for the Foundation. This was a really, really fun inclusion, and this gives the Skip a little bit of gives them something to sort of take heart in, that even though they're contained, they don't necessarily, this isn't the end of the line for their ability to do good if they're interested in cooperating. So this is sort of an olive branch where previously we have them asking, why are we, the Foundation, the arbiters of what's considered normal? Because that's why we're saying we have to contain them, is because we're maintaining the veil, right? We're maintaining this illusion of normality. And, it's something, it's a fair question. If they're able to do good in the world, why can't that be accepted as the baseline of normal? We have sort of a containment breach situation where they don't try to leave, they try to help. And so there's a lot of this is showing and not telling. This is understanding their motivations and their thoughts through their actions. And it's, what telling happens in an organic, sort of believable way through these interviews. And so end to end, I loved this piece. This was my other candidate for probably my favorite of the week. There is the pacing of this, everything spaced out in a good way. We end it at a reasonable point. This is really good. This has all the hallmarks of somebody that is more immersed and experienced than Dyslexian's, full time with the wiki would sort of indicate, which is always really exciting. There's been a batch of new writers that have sort of come in and really just started knocking it out of the park almost immediately. So really well done. Very, very hearty +1 from me. Moving on now, SCP-4492, titled, ready for this? Umbrella in the Toilet, by LE3, her first piece. Always excited to see first-timer pieces on the wiki. This was good. It's super short. It is about World War II. No, it's about an umbrella in the toilet. So the way this umbrella works, you take the umbrella, you stick it in the toilet, and your bowels and your bladder are immediately emptied, and then it all manifests about 1 kilometer above the umbrella. And while following the excreta, which is a new word for me, spreads across roughly a 10-meter radius. That's fucking gross. And then it demanifests from the toilet and remanifests in the person's hand. So we have a discovery log, and we have this Emma Tannen, and this is great character work in this interview. And that's what really makes this thing, because it basically is the whole article. It's not super long. Like, it's a little bit of back and forth. She has, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines in here. And it's enough that you fully understand their motivations, their brilliance, and the fact that they're a little not quite right. So all really well done. The idea that he's really weird about bathroom breaks, the new boss. So what if he's actually trying to watch us, watching us do stuff? And so I made the umbrella. I don't even have to sit on the toilet. I'm a genius, right? And our doctor says, you're aware of the fact that we discovered you due to the, quote, pungent odor of feces surrounding your house, right? And she frowns, says, oh, I Might have ended up using it at home a bit too much. What can I say? It's very convenient. I saved so much money not having to buy toilet paper. And then we ask, all right, well, we have one more question. Why an umbrella? And she thinks about it for a minute. Says, well, why not an umbrella? And, oh shit, right, if I'm going to leave my house right after going to the bathroom, I don't want to be rained upon by my own excrement. And we basically just end it there. So it is a nice counterpoint to a lot of heavy, really emotionally heavy skips this week. This is very silly, but still tells a fun little story. It's not the deepest thing. We're not putting a man on the moon here, but it's entertaining. And, if you end up, getting a smile or a laugh out of a piece and you don't really have any bad things to say about it, I think that is always worth a +1. Okay, moving on now. SCP-4372, titled So Very Small, So Very Safe, by Francis Scalia, an 11-year-old account and a first-time entry on the wiki. And this is a true first-timer. Ellie had a number of tales and other contributions. That was her first main lister. This is first piece published on the Foundation wiki, and the word that comes to mind is ambitious. There's a lot going on in this piece. So I'm going to talk about a few things about this piece. The tone is good. The scientific tone is correct. The interviews are the point of contention for most of the voters, because this is a highly divisive piece. This is only at +6, and that's very confusing to me. And what I think it is how we have described the D class in these transcripts. They have a lot of character. They have, they're polite. They have, they're fleshed out as people rather than just, sullen, swearing, crash test dummies. So that is a kind of an older approach to D class, because there's a lot of that, disposable class stuff going on. Motherfucker, blah, 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 blah. And there's a lot of that. And so by contrast, when you see the portrayal here that they're polite, right, boss, could you please remind me of our mission objective? I get why some people are going to have that clash with their expectation of D class, but I would be hard pressed to make that be the sole reason to downvote this piece. So it's strange, because you look through the rest of the piece, if you let's say you can just sort of compartmentalize that, say, okay, whatever, maybe this is a different site, maybe they treat the D class well, and it's closer to being like a janitor anywhere else or something like that. So you take that aside, or you could have just as easily made them MTF agents, and maybe that's where people are kind of complaining, this feels like MTF work, used in MTF instead of D class. So as this goes on, we have some sort of time loopy stuff going on, some things that aren't quite as it seems, and so what initially felt very confusing is pretty nicely elaborated on by the time we get to the end. There was very clearly a plan with this piece. They don't always feel that way. This time it very much feels that way, that there was an intention, there was an intended interpretation of this, and I was relieved that my reading of it was fairly correct, given the full sort of explanation in the comments. So the way that this sort of plays out, the D class, they get kind of mulched. It's kind of crazy to death, or at the very least, you're not getting them out the way they came in. So the whole thing ends up kind of being more about the morality around the D class than the anomaly itself, and we end it very much on that note, that we talk about how protocol was violated, in how exactly they dealt with the D class, and trying to find out things without need to know. So I think, perhaps that's part of the issue is too many people were reading this as the spooky, scary light within the pocket dimension, and not enough about the morality play going on with the D class, their treatment, and, attempts at getting them out, at extracting them. So I found this final addendum to be really illuminating there in how, sort of what the author was going for, but it's communicated in a way that feels rational. It doesn't feel like I'm being beaten over the head with anything. It is basically the subject line of this email is that they've been transferred to another project. So, and it's entirely because of how they handled the D class in this piece. So I would suggest giving this a read. It's lengthy. It's a little confusing at times, but the points where it's at its most confusing, where it's like sort of time loopy, are not as important to understand every word. I think a lot of that is just sort of setting the tone that things are fucked up and there's something time adjacent going on. So if you can sort of get through that and try and read it through that lens of what the D class are going through and how the doctor involved is handling their part of things, of having this team. I found this to be a really cool exploration of sort of human treatment in the Foundation. On that basis, I find it incredibly underrated at +6. This is currently, let's see, I want to pull up the rate module here because it was like 17 up and 11 down. So we're at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 20, 30. 30 votes and we're at +6. So that's 18 up and 12 down. Very strange. I think there is still, this could use more eyes because 30 people is not a ton. And this is sort of the issue of, if you're not in the chat, you're not in any of those connected communities, plugging, it's difficult to get eyes on it. That's one of the reasons I, really wanted to do this, is like to give that visibility boost to things that I find interesting. I find this to be very interesting, and I find their defenses of their positions in the comments on things to be very illuminating too. Like, this is not stuff that was done out of ignorance to how the Foundation operates in, most people's headcanon. This is an intentional challenging of a couple of things and including some things that they want to use later. I respect all of that, and I find this to be a very well done first time piece. +1. Moving on, SCP-4962, titled Dak Hunt Remister. This is a collab, Jack Ike and Swaghetti. I don't have a ton to say about the piece itself. This is sort of in that, well, there's no sort of about it. This is set as a Totley soft piece, which is a thing that the author Dave U. Fool has been doing to great success to me. Sort of a bizarre corporation that, deals in poorly translated, highly anomalous things. This, has the idea is right, but the feel isn't quite, it's not quite there. It feels, it doesn't have, what I had said in the cafe chat is it sort of lacks the charm of a Dave U. Fool piece. And that's a difficult thing to put my finger on as to where exactly I'm sort of led astray. I think we spend a little too much time talking about this NES game and explaining all of the ways that it's just a little different, and it's, in a way, doing that, the piece slows down to such a point that I feel like the base premise isn't really enough to pick it back up. So the blurb that we have listed for the like sort of a plug for the game is, it's in the ballpark of how I sort of envision these Tatley Soft pieces to go. But it's again, like it's these little things, and this is partly why I have feared to get into trying to write for any of the little universes that Dave Uful's been working on, the Corbinic Three Moons thing, the Tatley Soft stuff. I don't want to put out something that doesn't absolutely nail that feeling, because it's really delightful. I really love the pieces when they do come out. This one is, like it has all of the different components, the different pieces parts, but it's not quite where, I don't know, it doesn't have the polish. It is tame where it needs to be kind of wild, and then it goes a little too over the top where these don't typically go. It's kind of like the Dado skips, where it's something that when somebody sees a piece, it looks kind of goofy on its face, and then the trouble is when you try and write your own, if you don't fully get sort of what the character is about, you may miss some of the quote-unquote rules for how they operate. And this feels, it doesn't feel quite right. It is a no vote from me. I wanted to really love this piece, but it's just a little flat from what I was hoping it would be. Moving on, SCP-4746, titled Marked for Death by Hatcheye. This is their first piece in a little over a year. This piece was, at first, I really disliked it because I was not aware there was a thing going on. And I don't know how to better convey it. If I was writing this thing, how I would more clearly indicate that almost every line in this article, when hovered over, changes to a totally different sentence or paragraph. This is the trouble I have with this. Almost we kind of give the game away too early once you're aware of that. We're too on the nose with the description of the anomaly. So what we have is basically a chaos insurgency operative that's in our custody. So the surface reading of this, the not hovering over things and getting the alternate, is that the skip should not be contained but eliminated at all costs. Collateral damage is irrelevant. No attempts may be made to negotiate with 4746. And it's just everything, just hammering on that. Must be eliminated at all costs. Must be eliminated at all costs. We have an interview log where that's literally all Dr. Davies says while 4746 is talking sort of over them. And it looks like they're responding to things that weren't actually said. And it ends with Dr. Davies says, "I have reached protocol regarding 4746, and in so doing, I have failed the Foundation. And John Davis's employment at the Foundation should be terminated. Following this, 4746's designation should be updated to include John Davis." And at the end, we have a little bit of white space, and that was my clue. Something was going on. I still didn't notice that things could be hovered over. I did the old, it's probably white on white text, so I sort of highlighted it with the mouse, and sure enough, there was stuff. So I still didn't know that there was an entirely separate story going on. It wasn't until I read the comments, and that's difficult because a lot of readers don't do that. I would wager 5% at the very most are going in and reading the comments later. So at the same time, I think when people see this rating, which is currently at plus 85, they will be inclined to say, well, something's going on, because this doesn't feel plus 85 worthy, and go read the comments like, oh, okay, so as I hover over it, what it actually is basically everything that this agent says is sort of altered with a cognito hazard that makes it appear that they should be destroyed. So this is the CI's way of trying to deal with a traitor. So I really like it on that premise. We're fleshing out the CI a little bit and how they might deal with somebody. And this is in an understated way, and one of the coolest formatting gimmicks I've seen in a long time. It is just the issue of how do you communicate this to the reader that it's a thing that they can do. I don't know if there's a better way than this. Maybe. What I might do is do like, okay, so if you're familiar with on a website, typically if you have like a word or a phrase or something, and it's underlined and it's got little dashed lines under it, that's usually a clue that you can hover the mouse over it and see, a further elaboration or, some note to go with it. I might see what that looked like, putting that under the text that can be hovered over and have it change. I don't know exactly how it would look. I'm just sort of scraping that off the wall as I think about what I would do if it was me, and I wanted to make it crystal clear that that's something you can do. Apparently, if you tap this on the mobile browser, it does do the same thing. It will change into the alternate text. So, it doesn't appear to be hurting too badly, rating wise. So, really well done. Enjoyed the new twist on formatting, and the great thing is now the page source is available. You can see how it's done. You can apply it into your own stuff. So well done, well told. +1. Moving on, SCP-4486, titled Happy is Relative by Many Meats. And this one was kind of fun through what wasn't said in this Keter class skip, where we have an image of 4486 in black and white at a public event. And it's Ronald McDonald. And it's Ronald McDonald the Tulpa, as it is explained in the work. And we go through this entire description, which is 4 full paragraphs, never once actually saying it's Ronald McDonald. It's hilarious because there are few more readily identifiable figures in Western culture than Ronald McDonald, and we don't actually come out and say it, even though there's absolutely no doubt by the time you're done reading. So what it appears is that the McDonald brothers did manage to create a tulpa, and that he is created to learn the trade and become another helping hand and another, force for good. And unfortunately, after the death of Richard McDonald in 1971, things are not going so well. He's not stopping by much, but he still needs strong parental figures. He's no longer responding to me at all. Even when I did the ritual from store number 1, this is by, Ray Kroc, who was the one of the major players in McDonald's becoming the global force that it is. And what's strange to me is that the letters keep going to Richard well after he died. And if the idea here is that in 1974, in the basement of one of the McDonald brothers' houses, we are seeing Richard McDonald, a full 3 years deceased, and describing things. It's not like really elaborated on. It's kind of bizarre. So if that's how it's intended to be read, then that's weird. And we just sort of totally let that go, which is kind of creepy in its own. And what we describe of, Ronald McDonald the Tulpa being, this murder machine, sort of all hell breaking loose and killing people. And then we have a nice touching moment at the end, asking why are you doing this? Ronald is asking, the brothers, and it's our fault. We failed him, and And we had a nice cheerful moment. We're surrounded by the blood of our friends, our own tears, and the ashes of our family. And then Ronnie just left. I don't know where to go from here. And our punchline at the end is that the founding of the Ronald McDonald House charities are done sort of as a way to what we can say appeasement. It's not, I don't think that's quite what it is, but sort of showing what they can, that people can be good. And it's a really strange but very entertaining sort of piece. Ronald McDonald, the tulpa in itself is sort of a weird pitch, and something I'd probably said, okay, tell me more. It's it's a thing. This is well done. I'm saying all that like the only redeeming quality is it's weird, and this is well written. The letters are all good. The dialogue here is all good. And it is just sort of this bizarre juxtaposition of all of this is happening with Ronald McDonald that gives it that weird bent that I think also does lend it a little bit of, dare I say, like extra believability, because it is such a public figure, and you have all this sort of legend surrounding the people that played it, and the character itself. So thoroughly entertaining sort of piece. Not much discussion going on about it. Only 3 comments, one of them being the author post. And at plus 43, I believe very nearly universally upvoted. So very well done. +1 from me. Moving on, SCP-4801, titled Seto Vimutti by Wodenaz, and this is their first time on the show since the very first skip of the very first show, I believe. We might have done some ClabCon shit or something like that too. So this is an interesting piece. It's quite lengthy. A lot of dialogue that always makes it look even longer than it actually is. We've got this elevator. And there's only 2 images. I want to back up for a second. There's only 2 images in this piece for its extreme length and all the dialogue, but they're both very good. The first one is of this elevator, and it's a nice kind of grimy image that puts you in the right mind state for what may be going on with the disembodied voice that speaks to you from within the elevator. It's paced well. The description tells you enough to understand where we're going. We talk about some various states that the elevator and the intelligence within it are in, but they're not so important that they are memorized, like that you have to know all of this for the thing to make sense later. Because when it does come up, it's fully explained. And so I appreciated that I didn't need to go back and find that little table of what means what here. They explain for us, which is I don't mind when it saves me that sort of time in going and rereading stuff. So as you go into these interviews, the character work here is really good. But what I like is there are subtle things going on that you can, sort of blink and you miss it. But there's little things that don't quite add up, and it looks like all of them are intentional by the time you're done reading. It can basically all be explained by how powerful this skip actually is as a reality bender. And this may very well be an incarnation of Buddha, which would be the most straightforward reading of this. This was really, really cool. The character of the elevator and how it speaks to people is really fascinating, and the interplay between the doctor, the D class, the MTFs that go in, and felt like a good cohesive unit with little questioning things that show up. they don't make any sense, or do they? Um, it's all very subtly woven, and man, I really appreciate the effort, because what it resulted in is a really interesting story, and by the end, you are thoroughly like grossed out and not quite sure what to make of where things go from here. We do have sort of a cliffhanger, and it is pretty unsettling. So the effort in itself, I usually upvote effort unless it's totally undermined by some other element at play. So by that metric, this thing being only at plus 25 is it's disappointing. You want to see the effort rewarded with attention and with people having things to say about it. There's not a ton of either one going on. Like, the plus 25 isn't because it's divisive. There's only, like, it looks like 3 downvotes to, 28 up. So it's, again, just lack of eyes. This is the longest read of the week, but I think very much worth your time. 4801 is an interesting character with a lot of interesting things happening to the various people that interact with it. Really, really well done. +1. And we're going to close this out with SCP-4596, titled A Farm Upstate by the Mighty McBee. God damn, I hate this. And I say that because I've mentioned in the past that I am, like, super, like, uncomfortable with animal stuff, like animal cruelty stuff or animal suffering. And this has that in spades, and it's not a very long work, so it's basically all there is to it. And you have a scene where, you know, the MTF shows up, and, you know, this is Village Idiots showing up at this farm, and they've got all of these, like, fucking, you know, decomposing, putrefacting animals that won't die. And the guy tries to shoot the dog in the head, and it just, cries, and it's, it's in pain, and he keeps shooting, and it's just making it worse. Oh, fuck. So this has note at the end syndrome, but it's a good punch. So it reads, Dear Farmer Joe, Mommy and Daddy told me that Peaches had to go and live with you for a little while. I'm really sad and I miss him, but Mommy says there are lots of doggies on your farm for Peaches to play with now, so he won't be lonely like he is when I go to school. Tell Peaches I miss him and give him a big hug for me. Tell him I'll write him a letter every week and I'll send him his favorite treats too. That would make him happy. Love, Liam. God, so yeah, this is, it's short. There's no way not to upvote it just on what it really goes after, like just real visceral, like, reactions and horror. It nails that. And this is one of those classic get in, punch him in the gut, get out. This is a really good execution of that approach to writing an article. And conversely, where the previous, where 4801 has, like, 3 comments on it, or 6 or something like that, this thing's been up for just a couple of days and has 24, and it's a lot of thanks, I hate it. This is one that really gets after me emotionally, and I can respect that. +1. So, mailbag, I have 3 questions. The Mighty McBee, well, since he just, squeaked me out, let's do his first. Have you ever attempted one of the writing challenges on the wiki before? If so, which one and how did it go? I have not, but I will say this. I found one that nobody took Bright up on, and I'm not going to reveal any more because I might just do it. It's not listed on the contest hub. It's not listed anywhere. I found it. Nobody else seems to have. I may yet take that on. AIS Mallard asks, with the Series 6 contest probably coming up soon, yeah, fair point, looking back, how would you characterize Series 5, and what do you think the next series will bring? So it's an interesting question, because I think Series 5, and just in general, as we continue building the wiki, where there's still the most room to grow, if you look at how we've been sort of evolving, starting, I think, from SCP-1000 onward, is that we are going more and more into complex narrative. And the biggest challenge ahead of us is finding the balance of getting those more complex emotions going on, while also keeping it in that flash fiction format. It is a really difficult balance, and I think it is going to be the bar. It's going to be the benchmark that people are going to say, well, you've got the format right, but I didn't really feel anything. I didn't really get the narrative. I didn't get the story you were trying to tell. And this is already advice that we give writers. They come to the Critters, or they, get on the forum, or even Site 19, and they say, I've got an idea for this thing that does a thing. And the response is usually something to the effect of, what story are you trying to tell? And that throws people off. It throws a good number of writers off. It threw me off the first time I was, looking at trying to do something back in 2012. What story are you trying to tell? It's going to be more important than ever. And I think Series 5 has been another, sort of guidepost on that path of where we're headed. Rockteeth Moth Eyes asks, are there any films from which you take inspiration from, or just really, really enjoy? Any scenes in particular? So, this is going to be a very boring answer. I really don't watch much in the way of film or TV. Practically never. My first job actually was working at a movie theater, and it was, kind of a weird fit, because I really had no interest in movies, even, like a 15, 16-year-old making minimum wage. It wasn't real high on my list. I would tend to gravitate towards video games or books instead. So I'm not the one to ask, if you ask me, have you ever seen blah, 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 I'm probably going to say no. When I worked at the theater, I ended up sort of getting into it from like an industry standpoint. Like, I found the movie industry kind of cool, as well as like the movie theater industry and the decisions that are made there. But and I watched more movies in that 3-year stretch than at any point before or after. And that was really just down to kind of peer pressure, because most of the people that work at a movie theater give a damn about movies. So, I ended up doing it just sort of out of what felt like obligation, but never really been a big thing of mine. So with that, we are about wrapped up. We have 9 days of holiday shopping remaining. God help us. I still have to get to that. Don't tell anyone, especially my wife. I have not done any yet. Oops. We will be back next week. I will be laying out a few things possibly about, hopefully we talk about 5K Con. You know what? That's what we're doing, because it will come out. Let's speak this into existence. So until then, keep reading, keep writing. I'll see you on the other side.